The Lebanese pound lost more than 90% of its value in a matter of less than 2 years. But working for a Lebanese pound's salary, it's completely useless. 3 kilograms of meat is more expensive than the official minimum wage.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Silver Bullion Television, SBTV. I'm your host, Patrick Vieira. This following interview is meant to shed some light about the current events in Lebanon and the plight its people face. The challenges ranging from food to fuel to finance are occurring daily, and we would like you to hear the stories from the people who are on the ground living it. Thomas Seymour, welcome to SBTV. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you on, Thomas. We know there are a bunch of circumstances going on in Lebanon right now, and we thank you for the time that you've given us and for sharing your story there. So if we could, firstly, could you give us a bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Thomas Saman. I've been living here in Lebanon for all of my life, pretty much. I'm 25 years old. I studied and worked in finance for uh, for almost 4 years. Been working in finance, and now I moved to like the non-traditional finance, which is the alternative finance, cryptocurrencies and stuff like that. So I'm working in that. Mostly like I focus on Bitcoin. So and I also write some articles about the situation in Lebanon. Uh, and some stuff about Bitcoin, and I'm really interested in that field.
At 25, you've seen the transition of where Lebanon is today and where it was prior. In that time prior, was it easier for young people to find employment and start their careers and families?
Yeah, so if you wanna like date back the actual collapse when it started, uh, people say it's around 2019, late 2019. This is when like the real collapse and people started to seeing it, and the bank runs started to happen and all of this stuff. This is when you can say that we have a new Lebanon where you cannot find jobs easily. There's hyperinflation. There's all of these stuff that we already know about. But before that, Lebanon was not the best country economically at all. Like it wasn't too great. Just like all of its neighboring countries, it's maybe like better than some of its neighboring. It was better than Syria. It was better than Egypt, than Palestine. Um, a lot of people who used to live in Egypt or Syria, they used to come to Lebanon to work here because the wages are higher and all of this stuff. So at some point we were better than these countries. We were like, you can say, better than most of the countries in our region, but it wasn't too perfect. It wasn't too great. Lebanon, ever since like for 30 years, you can say, a lot of young people used to travel to Europe, to America, to the Gulf, to find jobs that pay well, to find even jobs. Because Lebanon, if you look at Lebanon, it's a very highly educated population. So you have a lot of people who go to university. You have a lot of engineers, a lot of doctors, a lot of accountants, and all of that stuff. So all of these professions are needed in places like Europe, like the Americas, like the Gulf. They are needed in Lebanon, but they do not pay as well as much as you could get paid in other developed countries. So, but at a certain degree, this was all right. This was fine. People were managing. You could start a family. You can start a home. You can start a business. It wasn't too hard, especially in Lebanon. If you look at the taxation and all of this stuff, it's not very high in Lebanon, so you don't get too much taxes. But there's a lot of regulations and all of that stuff. So there's that. But with 2019, and finally, as the collapse happened, all of this has changed. It became much harder to start a business. It became much harder to uh, find a job. Wages have dropped drastically. If you look at their equivalent in dollars, and yeah, so basically I think I don't have like the statistics, but there's a high percentage of unemployment right now in Lebanon, and a lot of people are fleeing. So now you can see many people are just going to the Gulf, going to Europe, going to America. But the problem is that even these countries right now, they are even not doing too well. So there's this problem that maybe you will not even find a job in Europe or in America or whatever. But people are trying, to flee, and whoever can flee, they are fleeing, and whoever can find a job here, that can pay, a remote salary or whatever, they are doing that as well. But working for a Lebanese pounds salary, it's completely useless, especially government employees right now. Um some of them just earn like around $40 per month, which is nothing. And the government can only pay in Lebanese pounds, and the government has completely collapsed. So this is like, in general, the situation in unemployment and stuff like that.
There's also a risk where Lebanon may be losing some of their brightest and youngest minds to different countries where they may not return.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the biggest factor here, uh, where you have like, as we said, the most educated people, they are just going and working in other places. But before the collapse, like in 2019, before that, many of those diaspora people, they used to raise a lot of capital and come to Lebanon and invest that money in whatever. Um, in whatever project I can think of. But this was like part of the problem here in Lebanon. Uh, you know, because if you wanna like talk a little bit about what led to the collapse, uh, Lebanon was running this sort of a Ponzi scheme with the banks. So the banks in Lebanon used to have very high interest rates on deposits. It was mainly artificial. So these deposits were made possible because the banks used to loan the government at a very high interest rate. So the government used to take money from the banks to finance whatever they need to finance at a high interest rate, and the bank used to be able and the bank used to have high capital because they had high interest rates on deposits. So this high interest rates on deposits that could go up to 10% and 15%, which is something you cannot find anywhere in the world, uh, attracted many of the wealthy diaspora, Lebanese diaspora living abroad. So these people who, like live in France, where the interest on deposits around 0% or even negative, they saw no purpose in leaving their money in French banks. So they took that money and put it in Lebanese banks. But that was a big problem because this money was invested in a huge malinvestment, which is government spending, which is, as we all know, it's always a failure and non-productive. So instead of making a good use of this money of the diaspora, instead of letting them put this money in a certain project and opening a manufacturing facility or starting something productive, this money went straight to the banks, and the banks loaned it to the government. So in a way, this money of the diaspora was wasted like that. So if we found a good way to channel this money, uh, this is why I'm saying, having diaspora working abroad is good as a first step, because they are they are very wealthy, and they still care about Lebanon. They still care about putting money in Lebanon. So if we manage to channel this money in a way to invest this money in the country in a good way, maybe this diaspora would have left their country of residence and came back to Lebanon and invested in a good project or whatever. But instead, they just put that money in the bank, and it got wasted on useless government spending. And here we are. So right now, the debt in Lebanon is around $100 billion. So $100 billion is basically wasted on government employees, on government projects, on subsidizing some imports and all of this stuff. So this is basically what happened.
Okay, so the attraction was higher interest rates, higher yields to bring money back into Lebanon, and basically went from the banks to the government.
Exactly, exactly. Most of it went to the government. Some of it, of course, not completely to the government, but most of it. And the only reason the banks could afford 15% deposits is because they were promised by the government 20%, let's say. So the government defaulted. They did not default actually right now. They're paying back their loans with printed Lebanese pounds. When they actually, the government took out the loan in lira, um, and they can pay it back in lira. But the lira back then was at a rate of 1,500. So now they're paying those loans at this rate, right? Which is an artificial rate. And as we speak right now, the rate is 20,000 for $1. So there's like a 90% haircut, something like that, on paying back the banks. So yeah, as I said, so this kind of worked. I mean, I don't blame the banks because the banks had been doing this for uh, 30 years, and the government was paying back no problem. But at a certain point, this Ponzi scheme got exposed. So the bank runs happened, and the government decided to stop paying back their share, and they started paying back at a artificial rate, and the banks cannot pay back their depositors. So we have this shortage of dollars, as you can say, and a lot of Lebanese lira is being printed, and this is how we got the hyperinflation, or where we are right now.
We've touched on the financial crisis that's happening today. Were there any warning signs that this financial crisis was looming, and if there were, what were Lebanese doing to prepare for it?
So I think if you are like a regular person who just goes to work and is not into finance or anything, I think there was no signs of, according to you, you're just living your life normally, and there's no signs of collapse or hyperinflation because the Lebanese pounds had been stable for 30 years uh, at a pegged rate, so no one ever thought this was going to happen. But if you're some kind of a businessman and you engage with banks all the time and you have like some sort of outlook on what's going on in the country, um, maybe few months before, or maybe a year before this collapse, you may have been able to um, predict it, especially when there was like one of the medium to big banks in Lebanon. It's called Jamal Bank. This bank, before the collapse, before 2019, it got the Federal Reserve shut it down because it was accused of working with Hezbollah and financing terrorist activity. So they completely shut it down, and ever since, the big investors in Lebanese banks, as the guys we talked about earlier, which are the diaspora, they started withdrawing their money from the bank. Little by little, they started withdrawing their money from the bank. And if you look at the ratings of rating agencies, they started rating Lebanon lower and lower. I don't have the exact number, but Lebanon was somewhere around the B's. And before 2019, they started lowering it to the C's and all of that stuff. So, and during 2019, if you are if you are a company, you have a big bank deposits in the bank. They started putting limits on how much you can withdraw in dollars. There were implicit limits, so you started having an idea. Some big Lebanese companies started opening bank accounts in neighboring countries like Cyprus because they had this idea that maybe a collapse is coming. But if you were like a normal person who just uses a debit card and you're just paying for, you're just living your life normally, you work in something completely different than finance, you're not a businessman, there's no way you could see this coming. definitely, like, no one saw this coming. So I think those were the signs. But the main issue here in Lebanon, the main issue of why the signals were disrupted, basically because we have a fractional pegged currency. So the Lebanese lira is pegged to the dollar, but it's pegged fractionally. Um, it's true that $1 used to be for 1,500 Lebanese lira, but at no uh, at no point in time, the Lebanese banks had enough reserves of dollars to meet this peg. I think this is the case almost everywhere in the world. So, but we had high reserve. It was something around 30%. So people cannot, cannot see, regular people cannot see when the economy is deteriorating, because in countries like where the rate is floating, you can see that the currency is losing its value, and you can see that in real time. But in Lebanon, you cannot see that. You can just compress the issue, and when it happens, it just falls down rapidly. It's like a black swan event. So you cannot witness it, and the regular people cannot see it coming. Most of the people cannot see it coming.
The ATMs. When did the Lebanese banks begin to limit the ATM withdrawals, and how have people reacted to it? Because I can imagine the wealthy had a different reaction compared to the average person.
Yeah, so in 17 October 2019, a protest erupted in Lebanon. It was based on what led it to happen was a decision by the parliament, or by the ministries, to add a tax on WhatsApp. Somehow they wanted to add some tax on WhatsApp, but that was completely not feasible and not doable. But anyway, they tried to pass some kind of a legislation like that. So the people, went to the streets, and a few weeks before that, there was like wildfires in Lebanon. Like multiple events during that year led to to those protests. And when the protest happened, the banks shut down their doors for 2 weeks. So the banks shut down their doors for 2 weeks, under the excuse that they need to keep their employees safe. They need to keep their branches safe. So for 2 weeks, you couldn't take money from the banks. And after 2 weeks, when they reopened, naturally, everyone panicked. They did not understand why the banks would close or shut down their doors for 2 weeks. So, naturally, people rushed to the banks, and they started withdrawing their money. So when the bank runs happened, banks started limiting people's capital. They could, if you had $1,000 in the bank, you could withdraw, let's say, $200. But also, if you had $1 million in the bank, you can also withdraw only $200. So it was the same limit on everyone, and this led to even more people to rush to the bank, because when you put limits, if you go to the bank and you tell me that the bank only gave you $200, I will panic as well and go to the bank to take the $200. So everyone started rushing to the banks, and after like a month or two, they completely shut down giving dollars. Like, you could not give dollars to the people who deposited dollars before 17 October. So these deposits that were before 17 October became different dollars than the dollars that you deposit after 17 October. So before 17 October, those dollars basically became useless, and they're not dollars anymore. They even gave them a new nomination, dollars, which are Lebanese dollars. And when the banks stopped giving people their money, some kind of a decision came from the central bank that now banks must give those dollars back to the depositors, but in Lebanese pounds, not in dollars, and at another artificial rate, which was 3,900 Lebanese pounds per dollar. So, and at the time, the black market rate, which is the real rate of the dollar, was around 5,000 Lebanese pounds. And as soon as they passed this decision, people started going to the banks again and withdrawing their Lebanese pounds and exchanging them directly to the dollars. This led to the exchange rate to even go higher to around 10,000 Lebanese pounds in a matter of 1 month. So a lot of people in Lebanon always say that they did not, like the central bank or the parliament, the government did not take a real decision to perform real capital controls. But in my opinion, this was the capital control. I mean, they simply did not let people take their money, even if it was not official. There's no point in writing it on a paper for it to be official. People just couldn't go and get their money. And in my honest opinion, I think largely this bank run could have been avoided if simply the banks, the central bank, gave some of this money to the banks in real dollars and allowed the banks to shut down the bank runs by giving the people a bigger portion of their money. Because once you go to the bank and let's say you have a $1,000 deposit and the bank does not have any problem with actually giving you the $1,000, your neighbor or your friend wouldn't panic and he go himself. So, the bank runs are basically just based on loss of trust. So the people lost trust in the banks, and everyone started, going to the bank and trying to withdraw, even if you have like the smallest amount of money in the bank. You just needed that money and you want to take it. So I'm not sure if this was done, as by mistake or on purpose. But this happened, and we are where we are. Printing Lebanese pounds is not at all the solution that the central bank should have taken. Instead, they kept the dollars, in the banks, in the central bank reserves, and they wasted it on some useless nonsense.
Thomas, how much have food prices changed since this crisis began?
Yeah, so food prices, there's like a phases to how much they changed. When first the collapse started, uh, prices did not rise as high as the lira rate rose. So they kept rising at at a at a lower rate than the exchange rate. But they were rising steadily. And at some point, the government decided to subsidize all these products. So at one point, not only bread and medicine were subsidized, you can go to the supermarket and you can see that you have things like meat, beans, whatever other basic food stuff. They were all subsidized, and so their price in Lebanese pounds still it rose a little bit because they were not fully subsidized, but it did not rose as much as the Lebanese lira to dollar rate rose. So this was kept. They kept this going for around 6 or 7 months. Even if you go to the supermarket, you can see that things like coffee was subsidized. Imported coffee, I don't know, popcorn, chips, whatever, like completely useless things that are not considered essential. They were being subsidized left and right. And in my opinion, this was the reason. And in my opinion, this led to the reserves that we talked about earlier in the central bank to even deplete even further. So instead of giving this money to the depositors, they were using this money to subsidize not only bread and fuel and medicine, they were subsidizing coffee, they were subsidizing meat, they were subsidizing whatever food stuff in the supermarket. And at one point, of course, the prices rose in Lebanese pounds, but if your income was in foreign currency, everything became extremely cheap. It was very cheap for everyone, and this led to the fact that the government was subsidizing these products. This led to a lot of people hoarding food. So there was a lot of people who have a bit more money. They were hoarding coffee, they were hoarding whatever. And at some point, you can see those subsidized products being sold in places like Kuwait, in places like Turkey, so because obviously, let's say you can sell a coffee here for $1, but a coffee can be sold in Turkey for $10. You just take that coffee and sell it in Turkey, right? So a lot of these foods that were subsidized, um, they were being subsidized and sent to. They were either being hoarded by a certain a certain class of the population which had more money than others. They were hoarding these products, knowing because subsidies will be lifted soon, and some of it was being exported to different countries and sold for higher, and they can make the manufacturers and the people who make them here, they can make much higher profits. But after this phase of subsidies ended, prices rose again, and now when you go to the supermarket and you want to buy whatever, you want to buy, let's say, beans or whatever, the supermarket prices these products in dollars, and every single day when the rate changes, they change the price on the label. So there's always this changes of prices, especially when there's high volatility in the Lebanese pound and dollars rate. So at this point, most of the products are priced in dollars, and you only pay for it in Lebanese pounds at whatever rate is in the market right now. So let's say there's something. Let's say meat right now. You want to buy meat for 1 kilogram of meat for $10. Let's say that used to be before the collapse. That used to be for 15,000 Lebanese pounds. All right. So now $10 of meat is for 200,000 Lebanese pounds. So it went from 15,000 to 200,000 Lebanese pounds, and many people, and if you want to look at the official minimum wage in Lebanon, it's around $650,000. So if you think about it, 3 kilograms of meat is more expensive than the official minimum wage. And there's a lot of people who work especially in public employment. They earn around that number, which is the minimum wage, official minimum wage. So this gives you a little bit of an idea of how much the prices have rose.
Thomas, you touched on how energy is there in Lebanon and how people are having to get generators to go ahead and provide themselves electricity. Is fuel also subsidized for these generators?
Yes, so this is part of the problem as well. So as I said before, electricity uh, before 2019 used to get like around 12 hours of electricity, 20 hours of electricity in some places, and the rest you have to try to find an alternative for the rest hours. But right now there's like 2 hours of electricity sometimes, 4 hours, 5 hours at best. So the electricity, the power supply situation has completely drastically became worse. So as I said, there are alternatives, which are the private generators. I, for once, I live in a remote location. I live here in the mountains, so we don't have private generators. We don't have anyone investing because my village is very small. So if you want to put a generator here in the village, if you want to do such investment, it's not very profitable. So no one has done this yet. But I have my own generator, so um, I have land next to my house, so I put that generator there. Um, and I buy the fuel. I can buy the fuel. And as you said, this fuel is subsidized. Subsidizing fuel was working fine for for let's say 1 year or so, but now because the fuel is subsidized and because the government cannot subsidize all the demand for fuel, we see there's a lot of shortage. Uh, you go to the gas station, they do not fill up your car, and they also do not fill up your, because I need to get some gallons of fuel. They don't give me as much as I need. And a lot of people before this happened hoarded a lot of fuel. I did that as well because, I mean, we all anticipated this will happen. So far we are good, but a lot of a lot of time you go to the gas station, they will not give you all the fuel that you need, and the private generators who are responsible for the alternative energy, they are also doing some uh, cutting the electricity short for some people because they cannot keep up with the official grid being shut down. So yeah, that's this problem. And when the subsidies will be lifted, we will have an even. It's not a bigger problem. It will still be the problem because fuel prices will go up really high. So, but at least, I mean, I'm all for removing subsidies because when subsidies are removed, at least you can find fuel at last. But they will be much more expensive, of course. But I mean, this is the only solution because the government, as we said earlier, completely depleted the reserves, and they have basically no money to keep subsidizing the fuel. So if they don't lift the subsidies now, they have to lift it after 2 months, 3 months, who knows? But eventually, the subsidies have to be lifted. So we're just waiting for that to happen. And once that happens, it will be up to the people who have subscription with certain generators if they can keep up with paying to those generators, because naturally, if when the prices of fuel go up, the generator providers, they have to increase the prices, and if your salary is not increased, you might not be able to pay for the fuel. So might not be able to pay for the alternative generator subscription. So we will see how will that turn out. But maybe by then things will become better. Who knows?
How do you feel about the purchasing power of the lira? Do you trust it that it can maintain its purchasing power?
No, I don't. To be honest, I don't because. In my opinion, I think the Lebanese lira should be completely abolished. We don't need it. I think if we take the route of dollarizing the economy, which will happen eventually, it will be far better for everyone. Because if you look at the M0 of Lebanon, uh, you can find this information online. The M0 of Lebanon has been constant for 30 years, and only in 2 years it it increased 8x, around 8, 9x. So it's all the fault of the central bank and the government. They're just printing Lebanese lira non-stop. Um, if they want to actually maintain the purchasing power of the lira, the first thing they should do is just stop printing it. I mean, this is very simple. But they have no plans to stop printing lira. They need to pay off the debt. They need to pay off government expenses. They have around 300,000 government employees who they need to keep paying their salaries. So they're just going to keep printing lira. And this, printing lira is hurting everyone in the economy because if you're a business owner and you want to, price your products, you're unable to do so. So every day you wake up to a new rate. You're buying all of your raw materials and all of your inventory in dollars, and you want to sell this inventory and this final product in Lebanese. You have to sell it in Lebanese pounds in some industries. So you're incapable of pricing. You have no clear pricing mechanism. So this is leading to many business owners to just shut down their business, and they're unable to keep working. And also from the consumer side, they're unable to know the actual prices of things. If every month you have a new price of meat, you have a new price of whatever other products. So in my opinion, this hassle of buying stuff in dollars, doing the calculation to sell it in lira, is completely useless and complete waste of time and energy and resources. Just buy things in dollars and sell them in dollars. There's no point in not selling anything in dollars. And I think we either do that now, or this will be the inevitable reality or the conclusion of what will happen, because we saw that happening in a lot of hyperinflating economies. We saw that happening in Ecuador. We saw that happening now in Venezuela. And a lot of these countries eventually dollarized because no one wants to use a forever hyperinflating currency, and you cannot price anything, and it's completely not feasible. So
Okay, so dollarized meaning they abandon their local currency and move over to a type of a more safe haven currency.
yeah, and in Lebanon already people use dollars a lot, so we are familiar with the US dollar, and a lot of people, they look for jobs that pay in dollars. And as I said before, a lot of money comes in dollars because of the remittances. So, we're accustomed with the dollar, and people prefer the dollar over the Lebanese pound. No one cares about the Lebanese pound.
Okay, Lebanon has been through unfortunately, a few sets of financial crises. But have you ever seen the lira devalue this much in any previous crisis, or in hyperinflate, I should say?
Yeah, it happened before, but I wasn't born back then. So during the Civil War, a similar case of hyperinflation happened, where it even inflated even more. Back then, one lira could give you like $3, something like that. So, but by the end of the Civil War in the 1990, one dollar would give you 1,500 Lebanese lira. So in the course of 15 years, the lira hyperinflated even more than it's hyperinflating now. But back then it was kind of slower. The process was slower. Hyperinflation right now, in the duration of 2 years, it's faster than when it happened during the Civil War. And back then, I hear stories from family and parents and stuff like that. Uh, they told me back then, even during the war and hyperinflation, the economy was a bit better. There was money coming in. I think that was basically because of the war. There was a lot of parties, foreign parties trying to fund the war, and I think that was the main reason. You would see more money floating in Lebanon. Um, it's not necessarily good money or development that was happening, but at least people were economically or financially better off than now. So that was basically mainly because of the war.
And for yourself, are you paid in lira? And if so, or even for other people paid salaries in lira, are they able to convert it into any other type of currency or foreign currency?
Yeah, for me personally, because I work for a company abroad, I work here remotely for a company abroad. No, my salary is in foreign currency, so I'm lucky. I'm one of the lucky ones to have such salary. And if you're in Lebanon and you're earning Lebanese lira, Yeah, there's a black market open for everyone. At one at earlier stages of the crisis, it was a bit harder to exchange your Lebanese lira to dollars. It was more sketchy to do so because, the government was trying to stop illegal exchanges from happening. The black market was considered illegal. But right now, it's more open. You have WhatsApp groups, you have Telegram groups. You can just meet with a random person, give them Lebanese pounds, they give you dollars at a rate where at a black market rate, which is known by everyone in the market. There's also some exchange offices. You go there, you exchange your Lebanese lira for dollars. It's easier than ever. So yeah, there's no problem from this side. Uh, and yeah, so like a lot of people who earn in Lebanese pounds, they don't find exactly a reason to, uh, especially I'm talking about the individuals, they don't find a big reason to exchange into dollars. They just spend the lira. But if you are a company that needs to import products from abroad, you go to these markets and exchange whatever you earned in lira, so that you can get some dollars and buy your products from a foreign country.
How do Lebanese feel about the culture of buying gold or silver?
Uh, I think um, there's a lot of people who in Lebanon, like, it's more the gold and the silver they buy. It's more in the form of jewelry. So there's a lot of people who buy jewelry in Lebanon. There's a big market for jewelry in Lebanon, and there's a lot of people who make this stuff. Uh, and if you go to any house in Lebanon, you can find that there's a lot of gold in form of jewelry. I'm not sure if there's a lot of gold in form of gold plates and stuff like that, or even gold IOUs. I don't think there's a lot of people who engage in this stuff. But I think in Lebanon, part of the reason why Lebanon, why people had a big trust in the Lebanese financial system is because they had this illusion that Lebanon, as you know, as you may know, Lebanon has one of the biggest, or the central bank in Lebanon has one of the highest reserve gold reserves in the world. I think Lebanon is the third country in the world with the as highest uh, gold reserve ratio per capita, something like that. There's around $20 billion of gold in the central bank of Lebanon. But I think that was more of an illusion because this money is, this gold is, most of this gold, 2 over 3 of this gold is stuck at the Federal Reserve. So the central bank in Lebanon um, cannot use it or cannot sell it or do whatever it wants with it. And a small fraction of it is still here in Lebanon. So, and a lot of people thought that when a crisis would happen, this gold could be sold in order to to be as a cushion for to meet the crisis or to meet the demand of the population. But in reality, this gold is just a number on the central bank balance sheet, and I think it's the case for all of the gold that is just sitting in the Federal Reserve, in the American Federal Reserve, and the federal government defaulted on that gold. When Nixon announced, the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. So I think this is part of the gold, also the European gold that exists in the Federal Reserve. So other than that, I think it's mostly just individuals holding jewelry, and a lot of people when the crisis happened, they started selling jewelry in order to meet daily demands of consumption.
Thomas, if you had to pinpoint one specific thing, what would you say is that one thing that was the cause of this current crisis?
Uh, it's the government. It's nothing but the government. Uh, the government was keeping an artificial peg on the lira for 30 years, and they were using all of the money in the economy, to do useless spending. They were taking the money of the people without them knowing, doing financial engineering schemes, Ponzi schemes. All this was for one purpose: to give the government enough money to do whatever it wants to do. Usually, the things the government do, they aim for political gains. For the politicians to have more people on their side. You have, as I said before, you have 300,000 employees who work in the government in Lebanon, and the population in Lebanon is around 5 million. And if you want to remove all of the underage population, you have around, I don't know, 3 million people who are in the workforce, and you have 300,000 people who work in the government. So the government is the biggest employer in the country. It's also the biggest asset holder. It's the biggest capital holder. It's the biggest debt holder. Uh, it's the biggest everything. And usually, when you look at economic crisis, at an economic crisis in the Western world, you look at malinvestments happening, dispersed between corporations or whatever, and they usually get bailed out or whatever. But in Lebanon, we don't have malinvestments distributed across the economy. We have only one malinvestment, which is the government spending money on useless stuff, on things that they did not afford, and we are now paying for them. So it was basically depositors, banks, depositors giving money to the banks, banks giving it to the government unable to pay back the banks. The government was spending money on welfare, on whatever projects, on importing, on subsidizing the Lebanese pounds, on subsidizing medicine, fuel, or whatever. And all of this money was wasted. And now we are paying for it. So there's nothing free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. This is what they say. We are paying for this lunch right now. So
With what you're seeing right now, would you call it inflation or hyperinflation? And if it is not hyperinflation, how do you foresee a hyperinflation scenario unfolding in Lebanon?
no, I think this is it. I mean, this is the hyperinflation. This is as worse as it can get. Um, People, woke up to the fact that Lebanese pound is hyperinflating. So there's no point in holding Lebanese pounds. People are looking for alternative ways to earn US dollars. So most people only use Lebanese pounds just to consume from the supermarket, just to pay at the restaurant, at the pub. So Lebanese pounds, just, you can call it a consumption coupon with a certain expiry date. So this is all that it is. And people, I think most people now understand this, and that's a good thing. Now that people understand this, they can start looking for alternative. They can start. This is why people are, trying to find jobs abroad, or trying to work in Lebanon for a foreign currency income, and this is the start of something better, in my opinion.
Thomas, I cannot end this interview without asking you, what are your hopes for the future of Lebanon?
Yeah, so I think Lebanon has potential to be whatever it wants to be. If you look at a neighboring country like Cyprus, Cyprus has far less the human resources that Lebanon has. It has far less the capital, it has far less the natural resources, everything, and it's doing far better than Lebanon because they have a less government intervention. They have a bigger free market. They attract for especially EU investors and all of this good stuff. I think Lebanon can be the same. It can be even better if we just let the economy roll and if we just let the people work in the market, if we just if we just put the political tension aside and try to focus on work, on productivity, on creativity. As we said earlier, there's a big population in Lebanon that is very highly educated, and not only educated, they are driven. They work. If if you ask anybody abroad, uh, ask them about Lebanese people. If you ask employers abroad about Lebanese people, they will tell you that they are they work very well. They are productive. Uh, so I don't think there's anything that's stopping Lebanon from being a good country, a good economy. The only thing that's stopping it, and that was stopping it, is constant intervention in the market, constant the use of financial engineering to try and absorb all of the money in the economy into unproductive places like the government. Soon this will all be over. The only problem that we still have to bypass is the usual political conflicts in Lebanon. All of this time we talked about the economic aspect of Lebanon, which is, I think, in my opinion, the biggest aspect of the biggest factor in the crisis right now. But still, we cannot completely ignore the political aspect. There's a lot of conflicts in Lebanon, a lot of divide in that respect. But in my opinion, when you have a good economy, when you have people working voluntarily in the market, when you have less government institution to worry about, all of these political conflicts will be reduced. There will be nothing to fight for. So there's nothing people need to fight for anymore. So I think this is how I see it, at least at the moment. So we just have to wait and see how things will unfold in the next couple of years.
Okay, Thomas Simon, we appreciate the time you've given and we wish you all the best. And hopefully we can check in again in some time and see how you're doing.
Thank you for your time and thank you for covering this.
That was Thomas Simon in Lebanon sharing the day-to-day life of living with a hyperinflated currency, inflation of food and fuel, and a shortage of basic necessities such as medicines. Is what's happening in Lebanon a precursor for the world? Only time will tell. As always, please leave your thoughts in the comment section below.